Good morning and welcome. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Julie, the florist that teaches, and I've been hosting these Zoom flower classes every Tuesday since the beginning of lockdown. And the format has changed a little bit since as the month has progressed, and I'm now running 10-week slots. So we are in week 5 of the current 10-week programme for spring. So before I go on and talk about what we're going to be making today, I'll just flash up what we made last week. And perhaps if you didn't come to class last week, you might be inspired that you might want to sign up to ask for the replay to be sent to you. So this is what we made, little signs, and I'm hoping you can read that. And when I look in the screen, it's back to front, but it says love on there. And it's a little sign on a wooden board with a paint effect, and we've got a floral flourish. So even when we're crafting, we do manage to get a floral flourish in there. And thank you to those of you who've been posting your work into my free Facebook group, Flower Start World. And I've also been getting a few WhatsApp messages as well. So it's lovely to see how you've been interpreting the projects that we've been making and creating together. So I'm going to put that to one side and just give a little bit of an advert for what we're going to be doing next week. Now, I love a doorwreath. I am the queen of doorwreaths. And next week, we've got a little doorwreath that's sneaking its way into the programme. In fact, we're going to be doing, overall, we're going to be doing 2 doorwreaths. So one is next week and one is going to be a couple of weeks down the line. So what you'll need for this is, well, what I'm going to be using is a wreath frame. So if you've ever made your own Christmas doorwreath, this will have been perhaps what you would have made it from. And it may be, if you've got a Christmas doorwreath that's lasted particularly well and you're only just thinking about taking it apart, it might be that perhaps this weekend you take it apart and you salvage your ring to reuse. If you're thinking, my goodness me, I don't have a doorwreath to hand, don't worry about it. Number one, when I send out the worksheet notes, when I sent out the recorded video today, there's links through there so you can at least see what you can buy. The links take you through to Amazon, and I do get a very small commission if you do shop using those links, but it doesn't affect the price you pay. But what you could do is mock something up. So if you're getting lots of online deliveries during lockdown, perhaps you've got lots of brown paper cardboard boxes you could cut up, or even a cereal box as well. So this will depend on how sturdy your mechanics are, what you're going to make your doorwreath with, whether it actually is something for your front door or whether you want to hang it up and use it as a piece of indoor decoration. So more about that next week. And we're going to be wrapping it with raffia. So sitting behind me, just in case you're new to raffia, this is what it looks like. It looks like a cross between string and ribbon. And if you don't have raffia, perhaps you might want to bring some chunky wool with you or some ribbons or something like that. So we're going to get rid of the sort of ugliness of the wreath and wrap over it in a different kind of material to make a quite modern looking, clean lined, fresh looking wreath. And if you want a little bit of a photograph, there is one in the handout notes that I've sent you out, but it's that sort of thing I'm thinking of. And these have been hung up in an orchard. Don't they look beautiful? So you could have your own little spring flower festival by making loads of these and perhaps hanging them up if you have trees in your garden. So little sort of lightweight dancing doorwreaths. So that's enough about last week, enough about this week. Next week, what are we going to be making today? So we are going to be making a twiggy lattice or a twiggy grid to help support your spring flowers. So what I'm going to be using is a shallow dish. So I've got this galvanized metal dish here on a little footed stand. I've also got a ceramic dish, just so you can get different things. It may be, perhaps you're thinking, goodness me, I haven't got a low dish. I wanted to make my arrangement in a tall vase. That is perfectly okay as well. The taller your vase or your container though, the longer your flowers will need to be. So for instance, if you've bought irises to use in class today, they would look perfect, just left really, really tall. Or you've got the option of using your, cutting them down and using them really short in your container. So quite often when we see spring flowers in our garden, there'll be little things, like at the moment I've got little, I'm looking out of the kitchen window, little snowdrops which are tiny, or my tater-take daffodils which are miniature. You might have some of your hyacinth bulbs that again are quite small, or your grape hyacinths if you've been digging things out of the garden. And spring flowers are renowned for having quite soft, sappy stems, so they don't like being arranged in flower foam. They want to be direct into the water. So if you're panicking now that you think you've got the wrong things for class, panic not, because when we make and create together, when I open up the session, we can have a look at what you've got for your class, and we can adapt and change the technique in order that you can go away with something that looks you're really pretty pleased with. To make the grid, I've been out into my garden and I have collected some twigs. So I'm going to take the elastic band off here. I've got a variety of things, and actually the twigs that I've collected today, the ones I like best are these ones. They're quite branched. And have a guess in the comments if you can tell me what tree, plant, bush those came from. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to move on to the other ones. I have got here some silver birch twigs, which are quite flexible. So if you like a silver birch twig, the thing to these is find out where your silver birch trees are in town, and next time you have a windy or a rainy storm, go and collect them, because they will be on the floor. Now, Joan has hit the nail on the head in the comments because she was watching my Facebook Live this morning and she saw what I told you what I was going to make and what I was going to use. And these short stems here, they are mainly cherry trees. We've got a cherry tree in our garden and the branches have been lopped, and I've been onto our dead hedge and collected those this morning. So you don't need a big quantity of materials. It's all about, if you haven't got very much, you work with what you've got. And you're saying these look like witches' fingers. These are, as Jonas said in the comments, it's conifer. So we have got bog standard Leylandii conifer. There was a hedge of this growing down the back garden, right through to our front garden when we moved into our house 20 years ago, and we're slowly trying to kill it off. But that is a piece of conifer branch, and it's been in the dead hedge for so long that it has lost all its green, and it's got quite nice, actually, sort of textural detail to it. Added to that, I've also got some sort of pure floristry or flower arranging materials, and off to the side here, it looks like I've got that game of pickup sticks. So these are reeds or canes, and if you are a flower arranger, you might recognise these, or you might have something similar, Medellino sticks, which come in a variety of colours. So it doesn't matter what you've got today. You could almost make this task. If you discover you had loads of pencils, you could make it with pencils instead of a natural plant material. So what I'm going to do now is to clear the decks a little bit. I'm going to bring in my camera from the side, and then I will start making. And I'm going to show you 3 ways of making. There's an entry level that you know, the simplest way to make your grid. I'm then going to make a more designer-led style of grid, and then go freestyle at the end. So when you come to make and create, you can decide which level you want to go at. If you've never done this sort of project before, you might want to start simple, and then once you've got the confidence with your technique, you can adapt and change. And I can see here that Natalie is saying that she is going to be using wooden kebab sticks, which is a fabulous choice, and I'm sure it's going to look really great. So depending on what materials you have, it'll just change the look. So kebab sticks and my canes will give a really clipped, slimline look, whereas something that is more rugged and natural is going to give a more rugged and natural look. So it's about being comfortable with your materials and really not wishing you had something else, working with what you've got. So put simply, what we're going to make is a grid to go across your bowl to support your flowers. So you could imagine almost like playing noughts and crosses, and this is the very, very simple version of what we're doing. So if I lay it out first of all, it will give you the idea of what we're going to do. If you think, oh gosh, this looks a bit too simple, bear with me, because we will sort of ratchet up the skill level in a moment. So you can see there that I will fix these together, but that's the look that we're after, but trimmed to fit and neatly finished. And we're going to tie each of these twigs into position. And so you've got a grid that you could use not only for this kind of container, but you could save it and use it for your flower arranging, you know, throughout the year, depending on how strong your fixings are, and whether you're able to store this, because it'll be like a little mat that you can lift off. So I'm going to start, and what I'm going to use to tie my materials together is this paper covered wire, which I really love. It looks like string, but it's got a wire running through it. It's a bit like a sandwich bag tie, and I like using this because you can twist and tie with one hand. You could use garden string, pieces of ribbon to tie, but I find if you're tying a conventional knot, it's almost like you need 3 hands with you. But there's no rush to this. You can take your time, and if string or some other kind of wool or ribbon is all you've got to hand, just give yourself a little bit more time to make, and it'll be look lovely at the end, but it won't be quite as quick as the method I'm going to show you. So I'm going to use those and then take all this apart, move that out of the way. So what I would say is, if you've got your bowl with you today, is just to lay out your sticks so you can decide whether what the spacing needs to be, and whether your sticks are way too long or whether you need to change your container. So make it to fit. So starting off here, I'm not going to make the grid like that. I'm going to start off with a bit of rigidity, and I'm going to go for a square first of all, like this. And then I'm going to cut off pieces of my binding wire. I don't know how long they are, 10 centimeters long, something like that, as long as they fix in place. And if I find that they're too long, I can cut off the bits, the excess at the end. So what I like to do is I get my piece of, I hope you can see it looks quite pale in my when I look at my laptop. So I've got my piece of string, piece of wire from there to there. I'm pinching it in the middle, and then I am going to wrap it around my twig and twist it so it's sort of just locked in place. So you could knot it on in place if you wanted to. And then I'm going to lie the other twig on top, and I twist the two together to hold it in place. So I've just tied those together by actually twisting them together. It's a bit wobbly at the moment, but the more twigs I add in, the stronger it will become. Now, if you struggle with your wrists and your fingers, instead of twisting the string, you might want to think about twisting the branches, the twigs instead, if that finds it easier to sort of lollop it around. It's trial and error. Try not to hurt yourselves. So that one's been tied onto the base twig. I lay the other one on the top, and then all I need to do now is twist that on there. And the more you add in, the stronger it will become. And then the other one's going to be across like that. So I'm just going to line up just to get my mark where I need to go, halfway down my piece of string. This piece of string seems to be much longer than the others. And perhaps I shall, when I line that one up, I know I have to have my string down there and then twist together. And then I'm going to put those underneath. And when I've got them in position, is that the right size for my bowl? Yes, it is. And then I will twist the two together. So I've now got a square frame, and I can lay my other twigs on at whatever intervals I please. Now, if you leave lots of gaps between your twigs, and you've got very delicate flowers, they're going to fall out. So, if I went like that and just made 4 little squares, you can imagine if I put a flower in there, it's going to lollop over. So you might want to think about making your squares slightly smaller, so it does actually support your flowers, but you are governed to an extent about how many times you want to tie them and how many twigs you've got left. So for demonstration purposes only, I'm going to go with 3 and 3. We'll make 3 by 3, making 9 little squares, but you may well find for this to be a useful grid, you might need to have more sticks in and make your squares a little bit smaller so they do actually do the job in supporting your flowers. So I know now I need to tie on 2 bits of string here and 2 bits over there. I keep calling it string, but it is this paper covered wire. So I need 4 more pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. So halfway down, Hope you can see what I'm doing now. I'm twisting it round, coming back to the top, and then tying it to hold, leaving those strings upright because that's what's going to catch the next twig in. Halfway down, twist it round, back to the top, and twist to hold. I will lift this up to the camera when I have finished, so you'll be able to see more clearly what I have done. Twist it over. So at the moment, I'm just lashing it on, tying it on in order that it doesn't move. And you need to be reasonably firm with your tying. These twigs are dried out, so they're not going to shrink. If you've cut some fresh twigs out of the garden, they will dry out over time and the whole structure might become slightly looser. So if you do want this to last, I would say tighten your strings as tightly as your hands will allow you. So if I lift that up, you can see bits of string added on. I've got sort of 2 little lines at the back, a twist tie at the top, and then 2 little legs. And these little legs are sort of almost like little V's. And that's what I'm putting my stick through the little V. So I can push my stick from that side to that, and then I will twist tie to hold, and twist tie to hold there, and then the same thing again, like so. And then for ease, I like to turn mine round, and I need 2 ties and 2 ties. So I might just tie on 1 bit of string at each end because I think you can see where I'm going with this. And then I will leave you to imagine the last bit of twig in place so you can see what's what. And then we'll move on to the slightly more complex, more designer look, which isn't really any harder than what I've shown you. It's just a different way of using the same skills. And you can imagine if I added that one in there, all finished off, and then you lay that over your grid. You decide then whether you wanted to cut these down, or whether you wanted to have them all angular, or whether you wanted to sort of cut them down. So look, they need to be over the edge of the container, otherwise it's all going to sink in. And what you want to do with these little stringy bits at the end. So if you want to be ultra neat, you could cut them off, or because this is paper covered wire, you can bend them round on themselves and they make these sort of little button shapes like that if you wanted to make a bit more of a little detail about it. So that's the technique of making your grid together. We're going to now adapt that technique a little bit and get more designery. So I shall move that out of the way. And to do this, I'm going to use some of my reeds because they are nice and straight, and I'm going to start off using 5 of them. And I'm going to cut out a slightly longer bit of the string, the white paper covered wire now. I've probably gone to 20-25 centimetres, but the same thing, I'm just roughly finding the middle. I start off with 1 of the twigs, wrap it round just to hold it, and then twist tie in place. So that's exactly the same technique that we used for the simple grid. I then take the next stick and the little V shape I talked about, I'm going to lie my next twig in the V shape of the string ties. So it just lies in there, and then I lock those 2 together. And I'm probably doing 2 twists each time, 2 or 3 twists. The more twists you do, it starts to add a bit of a buffer. Can you see there? I've got spacing between my twigs. So if you wanted to, you could do 4 or 5 twists and you'd have your sticks sort of buffered apart. So you need to do at least 1 twist, otherwise they'll all slide around. And I'm working with 2 or 3 twists, but try and be consistent. So then I've created what looks like a little fence. So in my best Blue Peter style, I have made some more of those because it is quite time consuming to do. Not difficult, but it is time consuming. So I've put these off to one side. So I've got a whole grouping of these sticks that have been joined together in the same way. So it's tied on at the bottom, 2 twists, then add in the next stick, 2 twists, next sticks, 2 twists. And I'm going to do the same thing and make a grid. So you could imagine if I take these sticks here and these sticks here, I could make a square. So I'm feeding these twigs through. You see, like that. And it's one of these things where you have to do a little bit of working to get some stability. But can you see that once I start to add those in, and I'm just going to place those on the top, I could get my next side and my next side. I end up with that frame that I started off with my original very simple sticks. And you tie them through in the same way. So again, just to save a bit of time, imagine I've just put all my twigs together. I've got myself like a layered grid. And I've made sure I've got 5 sticks in each bundle, and I've gone through and sort of made sure that there's 1 stick that goes through every level. So this is the bit where I'm putting in my cross pieces. So it's a bit like working with chopsticks. They want to do their own thing. I would suggest from experience, you need to make sure your bottom stick stays at the bottom and they stay in the order. So when you pick them up, sometimes they twist over at the back. So what I would do here is slide them through. I'm just eyeing this up. Again, this is for speed, but you could feed them through. I'm just hoping they go through in the right place. And you get through like that on the other end. I'm just going to trim those down. I've got 1 short stick, which is making it difficult. And they slide through to the other end. But they're going to fall apart, I hear you say, Julie. Well, this is when we take our next bit of string and we do that twisting action. But we have to do it when the sticks are fixed. So you need 1 closed end to hold and 1 open end. And then you'll need to twist tie these sticks in place. So I'm folding my wire in half. I'm going round to hold and just tie it, twist tie, so it's not going to go anywhere. And then exactly the same thing that I did before, get my first stick and put it in between the wires. So if this isn't clear, I'm conscious that it might not be totally clear, we can go through this again at the end, but I'm using the same technique. It's just it's not quite as straightforward for you to see it. But I'm laying in the twig in the V of the pieces of my paper covered wire, and once they're lying between the 2 wires, I twist to tie and then do the whole thing again. And then to stop them moving up and down, decide how big a gap you want to make, and with the excess bit of string at the top, I then use that to put it underneath and tie that in place at the top, and that will stop it moving around. And you can see then I'm ending up, I've just make sure it's in the right place. I've still got the same shape of the grid. It's still a geometric grid shape, but I've just made it slightly more designer by having those layers on the top there. So I've done it with the straight sticks because I think it's easier for you to see, but there's no reason why you couldn't do it with the more crinkly sticks or twigs that you've got. But I think it will be harder for you to work out where you're going. And again, you can see what I need to do here. So I've got my bundled up twigs here that open at this end. I slide them through, feed them through the grid side, take them out the other end, and then do my fixing there with my weaving, and then tie them in place with the excess bit of string. And you can then see, again, I think you probably got the idea here of what happens, and then you do exactly the same thing this way and exactly the same thing that way. So it gives you the grid, but it's got that more of a designer look to it with the stacked twigs, and I would say if you're making it this way, you just need to take your time. It's not difficult to do, it's just slightly time consuming. And when you come to arrange your flowers, you may want to have less flowers in your arrangement because you want to show off your craftsmanship. So I'm going to leave this one here, and I will finish this one off as I make and create with you. And I will make sure that when I have finished it, I will put in a photograph. So when I send you the email after class with recorded video, you can see exactly what I'm doing, and I will give you a close-up of the little bits of weaving here, so you've got a quick ready reckoner as to what you will need to do when you come to make your own grids. But let's move on to the third grid. I'll just clear the decks a little bit. So the third grid, so for the third grid, I like to call it the pick up sticks method. So did you ever remember playing that game as a child where you would have your sticks and you would let them pretty much fall where they fell? We're going to do a slightly more designer version of this, and I'm going to be using my bits of dried conifer. You can see here where I have them all bundled together. I've got the woody bits at one end and all the more dainty pieces at the other. And if I was just to let them drop, I end up with a grid that's too knotty. I've got all my woody bits at the end and all my fine pieces the other end. So I'm going to, whenever you work randomly, obviously random is really, really planned. So I'm going to lay my first stick down like that. And I want next time to have the second stick and I turn it the other way up. So I've got the woody bits are evenly placed throughout the design. And I'm going to sort of cartwheel them round, spokes for a wheel, whatever you like to think of there. I quite like this technique because it's more sort of natural and free flowing, but also the gaps between the twigs are much closer and it's going to offer much more support to my flowers than the more open grid of the first two methods that we talked about. And again, you decide how many of these twigs you want to use. Just because I've picked a few, a handful, I don't need to use all of them at the moment. I might discard these pieces just for now. And then my string again. So I'll get myself ready and I'm going for 15 centimetre pieces of string, the paper covered wire. I'm just cutting those lengths out randomly. And then I kind of need to go fishing with these wires. And I need to attach the frame in order that I can pick it up and it's not going to fall apart. So I'm notionally going to fold in half, layer it down. Where can I add these lips of ties? So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to work in two levels. It's a bit too complicated like that. So let's layer it up. So I cross over my first two pieces and I go under, back to the top and twist tie in place. Exactly the same technique as we've used for the other two grids. They're going to hold. And then I'm just thinking about my twiggy ends. Perhaps I want a twiggy end there. I don't need to go in exactly the same place. This time I'm going to do a little stitch up there. And this is where this paper covered wire is so handy because it's pale brown and it's going to disappear into this little grid around here. You may find you don't need a new piece of the paper covered wire every time. You might be able to layer it on the use your fixings twice. So twist, twist, twist like that. Bearing in mind how big I want to make it. There's a bit of a gap over there. So we'll come back in and lay my next piece on. Well, here I'm laying that on there. I can reuse that tie from the middle. So I can see quite clearly where these ties are. And of course, you will be able to see your own more clearly. I'm conscious the camera perhaps isn't picking it up in quite so much detail. And then I'm going to go perhaps like that over there. So again, I can lash that on using that other piece of twine. So I'm not being over heavy with my fixings. If I can make use of the piece of the paper covered wire that's already there, I will make use of it. But if you feel you want to work in a more methodical and careful way, perhaps the simple grid system might work best for you if you're finding it difficult to visualize the look that I'm after. So this little bit of string here, I might go that way, hold that in place there, and then one more bit of string, I reckon, just to attach that to that corner there. So there I've got a grid that just looks like a cluster of twigs. And again, this might not be your style. If you prefer a much neater and clipped way of doing things, pick the style of construction that suits you. This is bending upwards. I've got quite a sticky out stick there. So I'm thinking, do I chop it off or do I turn everything upside down and have it that way? In fact, I think I prefer it that way, but I might just cut off that stick. I think it's just a bit too much. I can do this with my floristry scissors. You might need secateurs if you're working with your kitchen scissors. There's just a few of those chunky ends, for me, are just a bit too chunky. So I have my grid on the top there. And again, with the bits of wire that are left over, do I want to have them long? Do I want to cut them short? I've already showed you how to twist it back down and round on itself to give you this sort of little round button effect. But you could also, using a twig, you could wrap it around the excess bit of wire, and it gives you more of a tendril, almost as if you've made this out of clematis. So you've got lots of different ways that you can finish off. Not sure you can see that, but again, I will take a photograph of that and show you up close what you're going to do. Now, of course, I need to put water in here, and that's the one thing I've forgotten to bring with me. Kitchen tap is a little bit too far away, but let me show you how I would then arrange my flowers through the grid. And I'm not going to over-arrange flowers because I quite like the grid, and I've put a bit of work into it. I want to show it off with a little bit of work of art. One thing you could do, of course, I love a bit of spray paint. You could paint your twigs. You could, a zhuzh of yellow or green or pink or white, so it doesn't have to be left natural. But what I'm going to do is I've got a few odds and ends from the garden and a casualty. So when I went out in my garden this morning to pick my twigs, I have discovered that under the snowfall we had last week, we've got these pretty little leaves. So these are a flower arranger's favourite with the marbling on the front. Arum pictum italicum, I believe is the name, but if you know better, correct me. So imagine I've filled my bowl with water. We always recut our stems before we place anything into the water, and you can layer those in like that and weaving them through the twigs. I then discovered we had some choice here in the garden, and I think this is actually a yellow variety rather than a green variety that hasn't got enough nutrients. So for a flash of colour, I'm thinking, it's sort of daffodil yellow, and you'll see that the rosette shape of that piece of the choicea bush fills up quite a big area. So if you decide, actually, I've not got enough flowers, if you choose a piece of greenery that's got quite a spread to it, it will fill up your gaps. And you'll have noticed that I've cut my stems really short because my greenery wasn't very long. So I just need to make sure when I put my water in that all the stems are actually sitting in the water, otherwise they're going to shrivel and die. Now, I did say I had a casualty. I had a flower delivery at the weekend, and as I unwrapped them, I pulled off one of the lily buds accidentally. So I recut the stems, and that's been sitting in a little jam jar of water on my kitchen windowsill. So perhaps something like that that's really small and is, thinking I can't do anything with it. Well, this would be perfect. It can nestle down into your container, and then you get a lovely view. I've taken out the pollen because it was starting to stain on the edge there of the petals. And then with the snow in the garden, the fact that we know we're only just coming out of winter, heading into the first signs of spring, what else am I going to put into my arrangement? Well, I did talk about that delivery of flowers. So if you bear with me a tick, I'm going to cut my next flowers from an actual vase of flowers. So here goes. So I cut myself a blue thistle, the Eryngium thistle. My flowers also included some Lisianthus, and they've started to open out. I love the Lisianthus. I'm not quite sure you can see the colour there, but it's the perfect flower because it's got a full flower, a part open flower and a bud, and that's what we like when we're arranging our flowers, the sort of 3 stages of development. So where you have got a bigger flower, I would recut the stems and I would put that into the middle. I'm going to sort of put it next to my lily, so I'm going to end up with a little white trail going through. I might cut off that side shoot of the part open, and that single tiny stem, you can see with the knot of my branches, it will just hold there in place, which is why I quite prefer this messy method of making the grid, because you can imagine that if I was arranging that tiny Lisianthus through my big grid, it's just going to fall through and into the container of flowers. And I may well leave it just like that and just have those few flowers in there, because I do want the twigs to become part of the arrangement as well. So I know that Natalie, you said you had irises you bought today. You could either make this grid and put it on your tall vase, or you could cut your iris heads down quite short and just pretty much have the heads in there, and then they would rest and open on the grid support that you had made. Of course, I can't tip it up to show you, but you've had a really good over the head shot. So I've made quite a low arrangement, but can you see that even though everything is low, I have got these flashes, just the way that the conifer branches were kicking up has given a bit of a flow, a bit of natural movement. And I love this because it does look like a sort of little tapestry. And who's to know, that these were the leftovers of the sort of the pickings that you might just have discarded and put in the bin. And in fact, I did spot some of our daffodils in the front hedge this morning where they had the heads have bent over with the weight of the snow, and I might add those in later on and just put them in as a, instead of having them garden casualties, to actually make a show and a feature of them. So that was that. And then to show you the grid, so I will continue to make my more stylish, more contemporary 3D grid, which if I can hold up. And you could imagine that when I finished it upright, it's going to look really quite geometric. This might be something that you think, well, actually, it's going to be wasted on my vase. I might even, I've got a peg rail in my kitchen. When I've neatened it all up and got the structural stability there, that I might actually hang it up from my peg rail and make it a little work of art. So you can see that more in a 3-dimensional way. And I will work on that one later. As I say, I will put a photograph in so you can see what that looked like if you felt the simple grid was too simple for you. So we start off with something really simple, but every single stage of construction, whether it's the simple one, the more stylized version with the layers, or whether it's the sort of pick up sticks version where we scatter the twigs on the table, the fixing technique is the same. It's the twisting your paper covered wire on to fix. So it's a twist to fix with a tie, so that isn't going to go anywhere. And then when you've got that V shape, I hold it up against my jumper, the V shape, that's where you add your second twig in and then twist in place. So over and over again, it's exactly the same action. So ladies, that brings us to the end of the formal teaching part of the session. So what I will do is I will switch off the recording and say goodbye to our viewers who are going to be watching on catch up. And then I will go back to the gallery view so I can see all your lovely faces, and we will have a live Q&A.